Unveiling hidden military catastrophes. Throughout history, armies have marched into battle carrying not only weapons and supplies, but an almost mystical belief in their own invincibility. Yet for every victory emblazoned in gold across marble monuments, there exists a shadow narrative. A tale of catastrophic defeat so thoroughly buried that it vanished from official records, surviving only in whispered stories and carefully hidden documents. These are not merely battles lost, but disasters so profound that entire military establishments conspired to erase them from memory, creating elaborate webs of deception that would last decades, even centuries. In this book, we peel back layers of carefully constructed myths to reveal 5 of the most astonishing military catastrophes ever concealed. From the sun-baked deserts of ancient Parthia to the frozen wastes of Napoleon's Russia, from the submarine-haunted depths of Kyushu to the classified training grounds of the Cold War, these are stories of pride before the fall and the extraordinary lengths to which military leaders will go to ensure that their failures remain forever hidden in the fog of war. What follows is not just a chronicle of defeat, but an exploration of human nature itself. Our desperate need to appear invincible, even when facing our darkest hours. The Lost Legion and Rome's Forgotten Defeat. Marcus Licinius Crassus stood at the height of Roman power in 53 BCE, his name spoken in the same breath as Caesar and Pompey. But on a scorching June morning in the Mesopotamian desert, he would lead 40,000 legionaries into what would become, not that anyone in Rome would admit it, one of the most catastrophic military disasters in the empire's history. The Parthians weren't supposed to be a serious threat. Rome's military intelligence had dismissed them as mere horsemen, nomads who would scatter before the disciplined might of the legions. This fatal underestimation was the first of many mistakes that would be quietly struck from the official records in the years to come. As Crassus's army marched deeper into the desert, they were being watched. The Parthian general Serena had transformed his cavalry into something Rome had never encountered, a mobile artillery platform of mounted archers who could shoot with devastating accuracy while at full gallop, the infamous Parthian shot. The battle began with an oddity that should have warned Crassus. The Parthians approached beating drums made from stretched human skin, creating a bone-chilling thunder that rolled across the desert. But the true horror began when they unleashed their cavalry tactics. The mounted archers would charge forward, loose their arrows with devastating precision, then wheel away before the Romans could close to sword range. The legionaries' shields, designed for deflecting spears and arrows shot on a normal trajectory, proved useless against the Parthians' specialized composite bows that could punch through Roman armor at close range. As the day wore on, the desert itself became a weapon. The Parthians had chosen their battlefield carefully, selecting a vast plain where the Romans would be fully exposed. Each time the legions attempted to maneuver or form their famous tortoise formation, the Parthians would simply circle wider, continuing their lethal rain of arrows. The Romans died by the thousands, unable to close with their tormentors, their legendary discipline crumbling under a form of warfare they had never trained to combat. What happened next was so thoroughly excised from Roman records that we must piece it together from Parthian sources and scattered archaeological evidence. Crassus's son, commanding the cavalry, attempted a breakout charge. The Parthians feigned retreat, drew the Roman cavalry away from the main force, then annihilated them to the last man. They returned to the battlefield carrying his head on a spear. Crassus, watching his son's head held aloft, made the final mistake of agreeing to negotiate. In the parley that followed, he too was killed. According to some accounts, the Parthians poured molten gold down his throat in a grotesque commentary on his famous wealth. The aftermath is where the cover-up began. Of the 40,000 men who marched into Parthia, 20,000 died, 10,000 were captured, and only 10,000 escaped. But in Rome's official histories, these numbers were systematically reduced. The captured legionaries presented an even greater embarrassment. Rather than dying gloriously in battle, they were settled by the Parthians in their eastern territories. Roman propagandists worked overtime to erase their existence, but Chinese chronicles record something extraordinary: a unit of soldiers using Roman formations guarding the eastern frontier of the Parthian Empire. Some historians believe these fish-scale formations described by Chinese sources were the descendants of Crassus's lost legionaries, preserved like insects in amber on the far side of the known world. The disaster at Carrhae rewrote Roman military doctrine, though you won't find this admission in any contemporary source. The rigid legion tactics that had conquered the Mediterranean proved fatally inflexible against a mobile, ranged enemy. In the decades that followed, Rome would quietly revolutionize its cavalry arm and develop more flexible tactical doctrines. But the true lesson, the danger of underestimating barbarian opponents, would be systematically erased from official histories, leaving future Roman commanders to learn it again the hard way. The final irony. The very completeness of Rome's effort to minimize Carrhae preserved it in historical memory. Like a photographic negative, the outline of the disaster becomes clearer precisely because of the suspicious gaps in Roman records. The more thorough the cover-up, the more obvious the truth it tried to hide. In the end, Crassus's lost legion became immortal not through victory, but through defeat, and through Rome's desperate efforts to pretend it never happened. The frozen catastrophe, Napoleon's hidden winter war. The letter sat unopened on Napoleon's desk in the Tuileries Palace for 3 days in January 1813. When he finally broke its seal, the Emperor of France read words that would never appear in any official dispatch. "Sire, the Grande Armée is no more." The report detailed losses so catastrophic that Napoleon himself would personally edit the figures, launching one of history's most ambitious military cover-ups. History remembers the retreat from Moscow, but few know of Operation Wolfhound, Napoleon's secret attempt to salvage his army through a daring northern escape route. As temperatures plunged to -30 degrees Celsius, Marshal Ney led 40,000 men toward the Baltic ports, believing Swedish neutrality would offer safe passage. What followed was systematically erased from French military records, surviving only in scattered Finnish and Swedish village chronicles. The village of Wolves, as the locals called it, sits in a narrow valley where the Dvina River cuts through granite cliffs. Here, Russian General Kutuzov had prepared a trap so devastating that French censors would spend decades hunting down and destroying all evidence of its existence. Using Finnish trappers as guides, Russian forces had spent weeks damming the river upstream. On the night of December 12th, as Ney's frozen columns entered the valley, the Russians breached the dam. The ensuing flood flash froze around the French soldiers, creating what one Russian officer called a sculpture garden of the damned. Napoleon's propagandists excelled at transforming military disasters into heroic last stands, but Operation Wolfhound proved too catastrophic to spin. Instead, they chose complete erasure. The official narrative would focus entirely on the main retreat, while Ney's northern disaster vanished from maps and memoirs. French officers who survived were quietly reassigned to colonial posts, their reports sealed under imperial decree. The truth emerged in fragments. In 1910, Swedish archaeologists discovered mass graves that didn't match any known battle. In 1956, a Soviet historical commission found sealed French military documents in a monastery near Smolensk. But the most dramatic evidence came in 2003, when global warming began melting previously permanent ice fields in the valley, revealing preserved uniforms, weapons, and even written orders proving the operation's existence. The cover-up succeeded in shaping Napoleon's legacy, but it came at a terrible price. The lessons that might have been learned from Operation Wolfhound about winter warfare, tactical flexibility, and the limits of central command went unheeded. Decades later, other armies would march into Russia making eerily similar mistakes, their commanders unaware that the answers to their strategic problems lay buried in a frozen valley, deliberately forgotten by history's greatest military propagandists. In a final twist of historical irony, Napoleon's effort to erase Operation Wolfhound may have accelerated his downfall. By hiding the true extent of the disaster, he convinced himself and his generals that the Grande Armée could be rapidly rebuilt. This fatal overconfidence would lead directly to his crushing defeat at Leipzig, but that too is a catastrophe with its own hidden story. The Kyushu Deception, unveiling hidden naval catastrophe. One morning in March 1945, Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi stood before a map of the East China Sea, watching as a junior officer removed another submarine marker. It was the 47th pin he'd taken down that month, yet official Imperial Navy records would show only 3 losses. The true scale of Japan's submarine catastrophe would remain hidden for half a century, protected by a veil of secrecy so complete that even the Americans remained unaware of their total victory. Operation Kikusui was Japan's last desperate bid to sever American supply lines in 1945. The plan seemed brilliant on paper: mass their remaining submarine fleet for a coordinated Wolfpack strike against Allied shipping. But American intelligence had cracked more than just the Japanese naval codes. They'd broken into their entire doctrinal mindset. A classified program codenamed Mirror Glass had allowed US submariners to predict Japanese tactical responses with uncanny accuracy. Admiral Chester Nimitz authorized the most sophisticated anti-submarine operation of the war, yet purposely obscured its true nature. American submarines, working with newly developed sonar arrays, created a 3-dimensional killing field in the depths off Kyushu. The Japanese submarines, following their doctrine to the letter, drove straight into carefully prepared sound traps, overlapping fields of sonar that could detect them at twice the normal range. The results were apocalyptic. Over 6 weeks, the Americans destroyed nearly 80% of Japan's remaining submarine force. But here's where the cover-up takes an extraordinary turn. Both sides conspired to hide the true scale of the disaster. The Japanese to maintain the illusion of naval power. The Americans to protect the secret of mirror glass, which they planned to use against Soviet submarines in the coming Cold War. Captain James Forrester of the USS Hammerhead recorded in his personal diary, found decades later in his granddaughter's attic, the only contemporary account of the battle's true scope. "They're running into our traps like clockwork," he wrote. "It's not a battle anymore, it's an execution. I thank God Tokyo doesn't know what's really happening down here in the dark." The deception's success relied on the ocean's ability to keep secrets. Submarines vanished without witnesses, their loss explainable by any number of causes. Japanese naval headquarters, receiving fewer and fewer reports, could maintain the fiction of an operational submarine force through carefully worded communiques. Even kamikaze pilots, launching attacks from Kyushu's airfields, had no idea they were flying over a graveyard of Imperial submarines. In 1985, American deep-sea surveys revealed the graveyard, dozens of submarines lying in neat rows along the continental shelf, as if parked at an underwater dock. The Japanese government initially claimed they were artificial reefs. Only in 1997 did both governments finally acknowledge the truth, releasing records that had been classified for over 50 years. The Kyushu deception rewrote the rules of naval intelligence, proving that understanding an enemy's psychology was as important as breaking their codes. But the lesson came at a terrible price. Hundreds of Japanese submariners took their final orders to the bottom, their sacrifice hidden by the very government that sent them to their deaths. Today, a small monument stands on Kyushu's coast, its inscription revealing nothing except the depths of the ocean and of official silence. Operation Tiger's Shadow, the concealed military disaster. At precisely 0300 hours on September 15, 1968, 12 F-4 Phantoms took off from Edwards Air Force Base for what was officially logged as routine night training. 6 hours later, 9 aircraft lay shattered across the Nevada desert in what would become the most thoroughly concealed training disaster in U.S. military history. For 30 years, the families of 11 dead airmen would believe their loved ones died in separate incidents spanning 3 different states. The operation, codenamed Tiger's Shadow, was meant to test a revolutionary new radar system. Designed to give American pilots an overwhelming advantage in night combat over Vietnam, the AN/APQ-72X promised to turn darkness into day. Instead, it turned a clear desert night into a killing field. What the project's designers hadn't anticipated was how their system would interact with the natural magnetic anomalies in the Nevada mountain ranges. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, the only survivor from the lead squadron, wrote a detailed report that was immediately classified. Her testimony, finally declassified in 2004, reads like a horror story. The radar returns started multiplying like a hole of mirrors. Phantom targets appeared everywhere. Then the real echoes began bouncing off the mountains, creating false terrain readings. We were flying blind in a digital funhouse. In the ensuing chaos, pilots trying to avoid phantom obstacles flew directly into real ones. The cover-up began before the fires had even cooled. Teams from a classified unit known only as Project Clean Slate arrived within hours. They worked with mechanical precision, separating crash debris into 12 smaller sites across 3 states. Each wreck would be discovered days or weeks apart, attributed to mechanical failure, pilot error, or bad weather. The operation's brilliance lay in its mundanity. Nothing draws less attention than a series of routine accidents. The deception went deeper than merely hiding bodies and wreckage. The military created entire false flight plans, backdated maintenance records, and even staged minor accidents at other bases to explain away missing aircraft. Families received personal effects that had been carefully salvaged and redistributed among the staged crash sites. The operations planners understood that small personal details sold the lie better than any official document. But they couldn't hide everything. Dr. Eleanor Kraft, a geologist studying magnetic anomalies in the region, recorded unprecedented readings that night. Her data, combined with seismic recordings from a nearby university station, would later help unravel the truth. "Whatever happened out there," she wrote in her journal, "it created a magnetic signature like nothing I've ever seen. It was as if the sky itself had torn open." The program's ultimate cost wasn't measured just in lives and aircraft. The AN/APQ-72X project consumed nearly $2 billion in black budget funds before being quietly shelved. Its failure would have exposed critical weaknesses in American air combat doctrine, but because the disaster remained hidden, these lessons went unlearned. Similar radar systems would malfunction years later over Kosovo and Iraq, though fortunately without the same catastrophic results. Today, The true site of Operation Tiger's Shadow remains restricted military airspace. Satellite photos show nothing but empty desert, but at night, local ranchers sometimes report seeing lights dancing across the mountains, echoes perhaps of phantoms that never made it home. The official files remain heavily redacted, but they can't hide the greatest irony. An operation designed to master the darkness was ultimately buried in it. The Desert Mirage, unveiling a hidden military disaster. In the pre-dawn hours of February 26, 1991, a column of M1A1 Abrams tanks rolled across the Iraqi desert in what military spokesmen would describe as a textbook advance. But sealed documents, finally released in 2018, tell a different story. Operation Desert Sword had just become the first major friendly fire disaster captured in real time by spy satellites, and the first to be hidden using digital technology. Colonel James McKnight's battle group disappeared into a sandstorm at 0447 hours. What happened next exists in two versions: the official story broadcast to the world, and the classified truth recorded by KH-11 spy satellites through the storm. The satellites, using infrared imaging, captured everything. 3 battle groups, each believing the others were Iraqi Republican Guard, engaged in a brutal 3-way friendly fire incident that lasted 27 minutes. The military's digital cover-up proved revolutionary. Rather than hiding or destroying evidence, they altered it in real time. A classified unit, operating from a windowless room in the Pentagon basement, edited satellite feeds before they reached NATO commanders. They transformed infrared signatures of American tanks into Iraqi vehicles, modified terrain data to suggest different unit positions, and even inserted false radio transmissions into signals intelligence archives. Lieutenant Wei Chen, working in satellite analysis, spotted the deception by accident. The shadows were wrong, her classified memo stated. In the altered footage, vehicle shadows pointed northeast at 0500 hours. But at that latitude in February, that's mathematically impossible. Her report vanished into the Pentagon's labyrinth, and she was reassigned to weather satellite analysis 2 days later. The operation's true cost emerged in fragments: equipment logs showing 3 times more damaged American tanks than officially reported, medical records of injuries inconsistent with reported engagements, and most tellingly, a spike in PTSD cases among tank crews who supposedly saw minimal combat. But the cover-up's digital sophistication made proving anything nearly impossible. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source: climate scientists. Years later, researchers studying historical sandstorm patterns noticed anomalies in their data. The storm that supposedly blocked satellite observation wasn't nearly dense enough to prevent infrared imaging. When they compared their atmospheric data with known tank positions, the truth emerged like a photo developing in darkroom chemicals. The disaster revolutionized military technology, but not in the way intended. The sophisticated digital editing tools developed to hide the incident became the foundation for modern information warfare. The ability to alter satellite data in real time proved so valuable that some historians suggest the cover-up's technology was more significant than the incident itself. Private First Class Michael Torres, who survived the engagement, left a sealed letter with his family. "They told us we were heroes for fighting through a sandstorm to engage the enemy. But there's no glory in what happened out there. The desert shows you mirages, they say." That morning, we became one. His letter remained sealed until his death in 2019, its release coinciding with the last classified files being opened. The Desert Mirage marked a turning point in military deception. For the first time, reality itself became editable, truth became programmable, and history became something that could be rewritten in real time. The desert may have swallowed the physical evidence, but in the end, it couldn't hide the shadows, both literal and metaphorical, that pointed to the truth, unveiling hidden catastrophes. The persistence of truth. The French philosopher Voltaire once observed that history is a lie commonly agreed upon. But as we've seen through these 5 buried catastrophes, some lies require more than common agreement. They demand systematic deception, institutional collaboration, and the relentless suppression of truth. Yet in each case, the truth found its way to the surface, like a body rising through deep water, refusing to stay submerged. From the deserts of Parthia to the digital battlefields of modern warfare, military organizations have evolved increasingly sophisticated methods of hiding their failures. Rome relied on the simple destruction of records. Napoleon mastered the art of narrative manipulation. Imperial Japan exploited the ocean's silence. The US Air Force scattered its secrets across the landscape. And the Gulf War's architects learned to rewrite reality itself through digital deception. Each evolution in military technology brought with it new ways to hide the truth, and inevitably, new ways for that truth to escape. But perhaps the most profound lesson from these hidden disasters isn't about military failure at all, it's about human nature. The Turkish researchers who found Crassus's lost legionaries in ancient DNA samples, the Finnish archaeologists who uncovered Napoleon's frozen catastrophe, the geologists who tracked magnetic anomalies in Nevada, and the climate scientists who exposed the desert mirage, none of them were looking for military secrets. They were simply following evidence where it led, demonstrating that truth has a gravity all its own. In the end, these covered-up catastrophes reveal something extraordinary. The very institutions powerful enough to hide the truth are ultimately powerless to keep it hidden. Every effort to bury these disasters ultimately preserved them, like insects in amber, protecting them for future generations to discover. In trying to erase their failures, these military organizations inadvertently ensured they would never be forgotten. As warfare evolves into new domains, cyber, space, information, the art of hiding military disasters grows more sophisticated. But so too do the tools for uncovering truth. Today's cover-ups may employ quantum encryption and artificial intelligence, but they face a world where citizen journalists, open source intelligence, and global scientific collaboration make permanent secrecy increasingly impossible. The final irony. The greatest danger was never in the disasters themselves, but in hiding them. Each covered-up catastrophe prevented crucial lessons from being learned, leading to repeated mistakes and lost lives. Perhaps that's the ultimate lesson these 5 disasters teach us. In military affairs, as in life, the truth isn't just valuable, it's vital.